I'm really honored to have been asked to contribute to this book launch for Natasha Bakht's book. I'm going to speak briefly about three things: a few words about Natasha herself, a little bit about the book, and last, a few words about the book's relevance, particularly from my Quebec perspective. So Natasha. I've had the pleasure of knowing Natasha for close to 20 years. We met while doing exams for the Ontario Bar in Ottawa, ahead of clerking together at the Supreme Court of Canada. Before meeting her on legal terrain, I'd heard about her as a talented choreographer and performer of Bharatanatyam. Her dance terrain had intersected with that of my then boyfriend and now husband, himself a choreographer and contemporary dancer. And when I got my advanced copy of the book, I turned with interest to see the author's biography. There were 2 long paragraphs on Natasha's distinguished career as a jurist and scholar, involving teaching, scholarship, producing her own, and generously editing and curating the work of others at the Canadian Journal of Women in the Law, and activism. It wraps up with the throwaway line, she's also an award-winning dancer and choreographer. So incredible as I always find it, given her successes and investment in being a legal academic, I assure you that in other contexts, the dance biography would be just as long and meaty, perhaps closing with the throwaway line that she's also a full professor of law. Natasha, when we met, I wondered how long you would manage to keep traveling down those 2 professional paths to the highest level of excellence, and you haven't stopped yet. Let me turn to the book, In Your Face, Law, Justice, and Niqab-Wearing Women in Canada. Natasha has written an extraordinary book. It is rigorous, deeply principled, imaginative, kind, and hopeful. She combines the results of qualitative interviews with niqab-wearing women, with analysis of other accounts of such women's experience, with analysis of legal sources, and with incisive, reasoned argument. Among other things in this book, she refutes 10 arguments for why women should not wear the niqab in public spaces. She concludes that most objections to the niqab are based on specious logic. The objections rest on the majority's unexamined, unquestioned certainty that their perspective is the sole one that is legitimate. Overall, she uses an intersectional feminist lens to study the multiple rights at stake for the minority of religious women with whose clothing choices state law interferes. I said the book was hopeful. Natasha writes that her hope in the project is that we might get to know niqab-wearing women and ourselves better. Rather than being alarmed by difference or stubbornly certain that our views and practices are superior, we might nourish social relationships and ask what we can learn from the past in order to change the direction of the future. And finally, the book's relevance, viewed from Quebec. In Your Face comes at a moment when legal challenges are being heard to Quebec's Bill 21. Among other things, this law prevents school boards from hiring teachers who wear religious symbols, not only the niqab. There's a grandfather clause that allows teachers already hired to keep their jobs, but not to move units or to be promoted. The law was passed, shielded by the notwithstanding or derogation clauses in both the Canadian and Quebec charters, because, as Premier François Legault put it, the majority was at ease with doing so. Religious groups weren't invited to the hasty parliamentary hearings. By the law's 1st August, we were sensing how much the law's shadow exceeded the 4 corners of its text. A school board announced that although the law didn't, strictly speaking, apply to student intern teachers, it wouldn't take any who wore religious symbols, since internships were really a step towards hiring. Although there's a grandfather clause, meaning that there are still many teachers wearing religious symbols who are able to work, some parents asked their schools to be sure not to place their kids in a class with a visibly religious, read hijab-wearing teacher. And it's hard to blame them. After all, the government had spent months telling everyone that anyone wearing a religious symbol, a niqab, a hijab, a turban, a kippah, is presumptively proselytizing and thus a threat to neutrality and to children. I won't get into the details of the legal arguments being made. That's for another day. Let me close simply by saying that many in Quebec would benefit from the curiosity, humility, and openness to others manifested throughout Natasha's book, and for its attention to the perspectives of women who wear one religious symbol, and to the unfounded arguments we sometimes marshal to put them in their place.